Welcome to the best of first-person episodes from Phantoms and Monsters. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads.
Upright canine observed in France. It happened in April 2017. I live in the PAC of France, and one night I saw something really strange. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I was driving with my wife and we were going home. She was tired, so she was sleeping when it happened. I live in a small village in the heart of the countryside and vineyards, and at night, I often drive full high beams, because we have a lot of game that can cross the road, so I drive carefully. I arrived at the foot of the woods, and I saw two luminescent eyes on my right at the edge of the grass. I told myself right away it's a fox. So I slowed down to avoid difficulties. He decided to cross the road while I was at 100 meters. I was not driving more than 60 kilometers per hour. I saw these eyes at the height of man, an indistinct and massive form. He sped away at high speed when I arrived at his spot. I pounded the gas. My wife woke up suddenly and asked what happened. I did not dare to tell her. A fox. I do not know what it was, but it gave me a blue jolt. It was the size of a bear because I saw the silhouette and it spun in the woods. It was a pretty massive animal. I saw him on the road between Ville-sur-Oise and Maison, where the green fences are. I never heard of testimony in the area, and it was bigger than a Pyrenean Shepherd-style dog or even a Saint Bernard. As I remembered the facts, I had thought of a fox. We have wolves near Mont-Ventoux, but given his size, it was not a wolf. My observation only lasted a few seconds, 1 minute max to the time I arrived at his spot. A massive body that was straightened from the height of his size. We could have said a bear, but there is none in the area. It was big, easily 2 meters high, considering the perspective of my vantage point. It was because when I started to distinguish his silhouette with the headlights, it went off at full speed in the opposite direction. I have not been to see the gendarmes, nor hunters, because they would certainly have insinuated that I had too much booze. JAL.
Werewolf encounters reported in Jefferson County, Washington. I am so glad that there is a website like this, because it is so important for people to get their encounters out, so others can be aware of what is really out there. 11 years ago my husband and I were outside working on our driveway. It was about 9:30 at night and it was dark out. I was raking at the end of our driveway. My husband was stacking wood. We both had our headlamps on so we could see what we were doing. So as I am finishing up with raking, I hear something really big running up our hill towards our driveway. I can hear each step it is taking. I thought maybe it was a bear because of how the footsteps sounded. You know, like it had some weight behind it. Well, my husband had heard it too. He came running towards me and then passed me onto the road chasing whatever it was. So I say to him, "What in the hell are you doing?" He said, "I'm chasing it away from our property. I don't want it coming around here again." I said, "Stop, are you crazy? Whatever it is bigger than you." So he continues to chase it up the hill, yelling and screaming at it to get out of here. He is yelling, "Go on. Get." At the top of our hill is a cul-de-sac with a street light. I'm scared as hell, so I'm staying back a little bit, but I'm curious what it might be too. So I continue up the hill behind my husband. When my husband chased it up to the cul-de-sac, the creature stopped right in the light that was cast from the street light. I could not believe what I was seeing. It was like I was flipping through the pages in my memory banks trying to compare it to anything else I had ever seen before. It looked like a werewolf to me. It was taller than my husband, who is 6'3" tall. It had a shen gray skin with tufts of scraggly hair here and there. It looked sickly, like it had mange or something. It had the body of a human, but its head looked like a dog. It had a long snout and pointed ears like a Doberman pinscher. It had a slight hunch on the back of its neck like a hyena has. Its upper arms were slightly shorter in length than a human's. Its hips were much larger than ours are. Kind of like a kangaroo, but not as big. But it was obvious from the hips and shorter arms that it could go from walking on 2 feet like us, or it could run on all fours like a dog or bear would. So when it gets into the light of the street light, it stopped and turned to look at my husband, who is still yelling at it to go on. Get. And the creature was pissed. I think that because it didn't like being in the light. But when it turned and looked at him, it snarled and growled at him for a second or two, and then with 2 long footsteps it shot into the woods above our house. My friend and neighbor asked me to come down to her house a couple of weeks ago, because another one of our neighbors that lives above our house just past the woods that the werewolf disappeared into was at her place, and she said we needed to talk. So I went down there. She introduced us, and I come to find out that he has seen the werewolf in his yard bent down on one knee drinking water out of a puddle. But I had had my sighting 11 years ago, and he had his sighting just 3 years ago. I have heard of one other sighting up the 2510 Forest Service Road just above our house about 7 years ago, and then another sighting in Quilcene, Washington, which is the town just north of here. I live in Brennan, Washington, and my husband and I know the woods around here like the back of our hands. I have seen and heard a lot of things in those woods, but nothing even compares to seeing what I saw that night. DL.
Walking Coyote in New Mexico. Hello Lon. I recently watched a YouTube video about an upright walking coyote. The place is Stancha, New Mexico, but my mom was the witness. She would tell me this story of how a coyote she observed would walk right into the valley on 2 legs, hopping fences, and just outright supernatural. My family has always had strange occurrences through the years. Many different sightings of things you could only see in your worst nightmares. So with this being, I believe the occurrences were in the early 80s, same MO as the last story. The town only has around 1,300 residents, even to this day maybe a little more, but I figure why let this story just die with time. Of course the sightings frightened her, but I remember her saying that the coyote would even stop and notice my mother observing it and lock eye contact before the coyote would just walk away casually like everything was just normal. I know that it happened more than once, so much so that my mother became maybe even a little accustomed to it. She obviously knew after a while it meant no harm, hence the awkward but familiar locking eyes. I remember this story because she would tell me many times over my 28 years. I can get her to reiterate the circumstances and situation again, but I feel I elaborated on the gist of it. Only reason we don't come forward ever is obviously the ridicule we would receive. I felt after hearing about the lady's story from Oklahoma it was time. Feel free to email me back with any questions. I know how things like this sound, but I am a firm believer that just because you can't touch it doesn't mean it's not there. Thank you for allowing me to entertain you with this story. J.A.
Multiple upright canines observed at Camp Stewart, Georgia. I enjoy reading your newsletter and thought I would send a story my grandfather John told me. In 1940 he volunteered for active duty and was later shipped off to Camp Stewart, Georgia. He had graduated high school in New York City the year before and thought that the US would be fighting in the war eventually, so he signed up before he was drafted. At the time, he was part of an anti-aircraft training unit that was housed in large tents. Camp Stewart, now Fort Stewart, was a fairly new facility, and much of it was under construction. Most of the tents were in or near an area that was densely forested. I don't know how many guys were in the tent with him, but he was friends with another guy from New York City named Pete. They hadn't been there long when stories about weird creatures in the woods started to circulate among the soldiers. One of the rumors was that a few soldiers had been attacked by an unknown beast within the camp. There wasn't a lot said and no one, he believes, ever witnessed the attacks. One early morning, Grandpa John and Pete along with other soldiers were transporting garbage to an area north of the camp. He said that there was a large ditch where all the refuse was dumped. It was hauled in large barrels which were emptied one by one. He was in the lead truck as they pulled up to the dump area. They noticed a very large dog on the back edge of the ditch, which looked to be digging in the trash. They were commenting that the dog may have been a wolf because it was huge. While they were talking among themselves, the dog stood up on its 2 back legs and looked directly at them. After a few seconds, it turned and dropped to 4 legs, then ran into the woods. They were alarmed and considered leaving, but there were armed personnel on patrol. They then wondered why armed soldiers needed to guard a garbage dump. They quickly got their work done because they wanted to leave as soon as possible. Grandpa John said that he later had a conversation with one of the guys who had spent time guarding the garbage dump. According to him, the higher-ups were aware of the large dogs, which he believed to be wolves. He said that there were other similar beasts in the area and that they were ordered to shoot to kill if they had the opportunity. He admitted that he witnessed one of these wolves stand up on two legs and walk, though he didn't say why he failed to shoot at it. Grandpa John was later injured during training, but after 2 years he was cleared for assignment and served in the US Army in Europe. He said that over the years he had talked to other vets who had trained at Fort Stewart. A few of them were aware of the attacks and that it probably occurred on more than one occasion. I have read about the Dogman sightings on your website. I wonder if the Fort Stewart beasts may have been the same type of creatures? I'd be interested if others had ever heard of these attacks. Thank you, Jack.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.